Like most people with at least a high school education, I've long thought Glenn Beck to be a pompous, self-serving egomaniac who will say just about anything to shock and scare the living hell out of his illiterate fan base without the slightest regard for facts, journalistic integrity, or coherency of argument. I've got to admit, he makes great TV, even if watching him makes me want to staple bagels to my face. But reflecting on his performance in recent weeks actually has me rethinking my assumption that Beck has as much poise and self-possession as I've given him credit for. Sure, he's shoveling pure, unadulterated bullshit down the throat of the right wing, and they're actually thanking him for it as if that bullshit were the cum of Ronald Reagan himself. But if you take a step back from the befuddling content of what Beck says, and focus instead on the logical structure, or rather the lack thereof, a strange pattern starts to emerge. Maybe Beck doesn't actually realize what he's saying. Maybe he's not a horribly dishonest, self-aggrandizing huckster. Maybe Glenn Beck is actually mentally retarded. Now, I know, you're not supposed to say that. It's politically incorrect, horribly insensitive, and very insulting to people who actually are mentally retarded. But honestly, if you think about it for a minute, it really seems to be the only plausible explanation for this man's behavior. Take Exhibit A.
This president, I think, has exposed himself as a guy over and over and over again who has a deep-seated hatred for white people or the white culture. I don't know what it is.
You can't say he doesn't like white people. David Axelrod's white. Rahm Emanuel's his chief of staff are white. I think 70% of the people that we see every day are white. Robert Gibbs is white.
I'm not saying that he doesn't like white people. I'm saying he has a problem. This guy is, I believe, a racist.
Okay. That was pretty stupid. But hey, it's live TV. Anyone who's on live TV as much as Beck is bound to be caught in a few embarrassing contradictions. I don't care how smart or eloquent you are. Hell, I have a hard enough time pulling off these 10-minute YouTube clips. If this were just an isolated incident, I'd be inclined to say, stupid mistake, happens to the best of us. But what if Glenn Beck is actually mentally retarded? In that case, he simply doesn't realize that there's a contradiction there. It's not a faux pas, he just lacks the cognitive capacity to see that being a racist in this context actually means not liking white people. Okay, I sense you're not convinced. So, on to Exhibit B.
America already has the best health care in the world. We do take care of our sick. You're about to lose the best health care system in the world. What does it mean for the rest of the world if we lose our position as the innovator, as having the best health care in the country, in the world? No matter how much the healthcare system would try to keep me down, I'm back.
A personal voyage through the nightmare that is our healthcare system.
We seem to be, Regina, a society or a system now in healthcare that is just trying to shove the patients out that door as fast as they can. Getting well in this country can actually almost kill you.
Again, I know what you're thinking. He's a hack. He exploited his personal misfortune to bump his ratings, then did a 180 the moment his experience conflicted with his overlord's talking points. Yeah, maybe. But what if Glenn Beck actually is mentally retarded? It's simply beyond the capacity of his hydrocephalic skull to realize that a medical system that tries to shove patients out of the door as fast as they can actually cannot be the best healthcare system in the world. It's not that he forgot. It's not that he changed his mind. He simply just doesn't understand that the prior is incompatible with the latter. Speaking of which,
America woke up to a tragedy today. 50 people were killed in a Continental Airlines plane crash just outside of Buffalo, New York. But I want to focus just for a second on one victim and what she can teach us about grief and love. Beverly Eckert. She died in that crash last night. You may not recognize her. Maybe you do. Beverly's husband, Sean, he was killed in the South Tower of the World Trade Center on 9/11. But after the attacks, she became a vocal activist for families of 9/11 victims. She pushed for the 9/11 Commission. She demanded answers from the government and helped win the passage of the intelligence reform law. Beverly even met with President Obama just last week. But to really learn from Beverly and Sean, we have to look back to that horrible day.
You know, it took me about a year to start hating the 9/11 victims' families. It took me about a year. But when I see, 9/11 victim family, on television or whatever, I'm just like, oh, shut up.
This one's great because it's a twofer. Now, you might be inclined to see that clip about the plane crash as shameless exploitation of our national grief and sympathy, especially since it came a mere 2 years after he said he hated that one victim who can teach us about grief and love and wanted her to shut up. But wouldn't this make a lot more sense if Glenn Beck is actually mentally retarded? Only someone with an IQ roughly the equivalent of plant life could make such a flagrant self-contradiction. Not only would that account for the fact that he just lionized someone he claimed to hate, it would also explain how one of TV's biggest blowhards could lambaste someone else as always complaining. Psychologists call that projection. I call it Exhibit C. And now we come to the linchpin.
I told you that we were going to talk about these things. We're going to talk about Obama, the left, internationalists, graft, acorn-style organizations, revolution, and hidden agenda. O-L-I-G-A-R-H. One letter is missing. Why did I select these words? Because acorn selects tides. They all select their words first and then tie them all together into one word. Oligarch, the one that's missing, is Y.
Crucial to grasping the level of ineptitude at play here is the realization that this was not simply a spontaneous spelling error. God knows everyone makes plenty of those, myself included. Hell, I made one just a couple of videos ago. No, this was actually scripted. I mean, mentally retarded or not, this guy is a professional. He actually rehearsed this. He had to set out in advance which words he was going to place on that chalkboard to come up with that aborted acronym. And what he came up with was O-L-I-G-A-R-H-Y. Oligarchy. This is not a word in any language on the face of this earth. You know who realizes this? Everyone who is not mentally retarded. But of course, this makes perfect sense if Glenn Beck doesn't fall into that category. Because if Glenn Beck is actually mentally retarded, then he wasn't trying to spell oligarchy. He was just trying to make a scary-sounding noise. That was just Glenn's way of saying, Obama bad. He bad. Me no like Obama. Barack Obama took my shoe. It's the same thing with all his cries of socialism, fascism, communism, czars, acorn, acorn! Glenn Beck has no idea what these terms mean, but that doesn't matter. He's living in a completely post-semantic world. So in closing, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying Glenn Beck is actually mentally retarded. I'm just saying, if he were, it sure would explain a lot.